You're listening to a 3CR podcast recorded in a 3CR community radio studio in Melbourne, Australia. If you like what you hear, please consider donating or subscribing so we can keep bringing you more independent community content. For more information, go to 3cr.org.au.
Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. And this episode of Doin Time contains audio images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have died and discussion of deaths in custody. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until the next hour. On today's show, we will be joined by David Glanz from the Refugee Action Collective to talk about land disruption protests and the police response to the unfolding gross events of arrests and violence by the police. And if you want to hear more specific eyewitness accounts, you can check back on the audio from Monday breakfast this morning and also Solidarity breakfast as well, where there were some recordings of the protests. But I will check with David, but I believe that he was actually at the protests as well, and we'll check in with him very soon. Then we will be interviewing Anthony Kelly from Melbourne Activist Legal Support, also about the police response and some of the really valuable information about knowing your rights and looking at special police powers. For example, looking at Victoria Police special powers and looking at designated areas where the police were issued these special anti-terrorist powers to detain people. And I want to see if David can talk to us about that. So this is a show really primarily concentrating on what happened. And we will now be joined by David. Hello, David. Welcome to the program.
Yes, good afternoon. How are you?
Oh, not bad. Not bad. So much going on, isn't it, really? So, David, I'm wondering if you could just set the scene for us. Can you talk a little bit about land disruption and the protests there? Were you actually present there?
Yes, I was there on Wednesday morning outside the Land Forces Expo, the one-stop genocide shop, as organisers of the protest described it. And what I saw was pretty horrific.
Tell us about it.
Sure. I arrived at about 8 o'clock, so the protests had been going for a little while, but things were pretty calm. The police had blocked off a very big stretch, essentially between Crown Casino and Jeff Shed.
Right.
And so there was a large area from which we were excluded. As far as I could see, pretty much everybody who was protesting was on the city side, the north side of the casino and the exhibition centre. And it was pretty peaceful at 8 o'clock as business people were coming in to take part in the weapons expo. They were shouted at, told shame. People around me were calling out, think of the children you're killing. I think these people fully deserve to be called out because while the media attention has been on what happened outside the expo, inside the expo, we had weapons of mass destruction and certainly weapons of severe destruction being paraded for sale. And I think that's something we can discuss. It was something really absolutely disgusting. Then the police did something which I think was a bit odd. They actually retreated behind their own barricades, leaving some of the business people essentially to work their way through the crowd. So the police had formed a safe corridor for those people, but then they retreated, leaving the business people essentially, we could say, undefended. And the result of that is that the crowd got closer, and as the crowd got closer and more boisterous, the police then counterattacked. And I even wonder if the police were deliberately setting up protesters for a counterattack. And we began to see the use of capsicum spray. This is at the end of the bridge from where Spencer Street comes down and crosses the Yarra to Crown Casino, Clarendon Street, and Jeff Shed. We began to see a lot of capsicum spray being used. It really crossed my mind. It's a bit like watching a high school muck-up day where people are messing about with shaving foam, except no one gets hurt by shaving foam. The capsicum spray was just going everywhere. People were reeling away in enormous pain. And then the riot police with shields came up, then the police horses, and essentially the police launched a counterattack and pushed people back over the bridge. They pushed us back some way, and then everything stopped. People were standing on the bridge. They were chanting. They were shouting. They were showing their anger with the whole expo. And then the police moved forward again, and then something happened which I've personally never experienced, and that is they started using stun grenades. And a stun grenade is also known as a flashbang. So it's not a grenade designed to kill, as in war. It's a projectile designed to explode and disorient and to some degree deafen people and cause confusion and panic. And certainly the first one or two that went off, people were just looking around going, what is happening? Did a bomb just go off? There was a lot of confusion. The police then used a number more flashbangs. They started shooting rubber bullets, and then they charged at us and essentially drove protesters off the bridge. In the course of all this, people were injured. There's media reports about an independent photographer who was shot with a rubber bullet in the ear. He lost part of his ear, and it's reported he may lose some of his hearing.
Who lost part of his ear?
A photographer, I don't think a mainstream media photographer, but a photographer who's supporting the movement was shot with a rubber bullet in his ear. And rubber bullets are meant to be aimed low because obviously they can damage your ear, but they can also take out your eye. Yeah. And there certainly have been examples of that before. Another protester was shot in the chest, and my understanding is had to go to hospital for an operation.
Did you witness that, or are you speaking from media reports?
For that, I'm speaking from media reports.
Sure.
But in the chaos, there were flashbangs, there were rubber bullets, there were people clearly being hit and being bruised. So it all became a bit of a kaleidoscope of events. The flashbangs are very clear because when that goes off, everybody hears them. The rubber bullets, if you're not hit or the person not next to you is hit, you're not quite so aware of it. But there was a very deliberate attempt to crush protest. I think the police were using last Wednesday as something of as a training exercise. They deliberately exaggerated to the media the size of the expected protest and the militancy of the protest. I think they did that to justify getting, according to media reports, between $10 and $15 million extra from the state government to bring down police, including riot police from New South Wales and Queensland. And I think it was an opportunity for them to roll out their battle plans, but also to use things like flashbangs and rubber bullets against a left-wing crowd and to begin to normalise it. And that's one of the risks, is that protests in Melbourne will become a little bit more dangerous in the future unless we are able to turn out in much larger numbers. And it's always the case with the police that essentially they're bullies. If we turn out in large numbers, they tend to step back and they pick on people if they think they can get away with it. But there was no doubt that the police response was massively out of proportion to the minor jostling and scuffles that were taking place as business people were arrogant enough to try and push their way through the crowd into the expo. And that, to be honest, they had other options, where if they'd walked a few hundred metres extra, they could have entered without even coming within earshot of the protesters. So I think the police allowed the situation to escalate and then came in very, very hard. And to me, it was a police riot. It was an exercise in brute force. And as I say, I think they are both practising their tactics and trying to normalise a degree of violence which most people would not have regarded as being acceptable. And the good responses, apart from the protesters themselves, there's been responses from MALS, and you're talking to the Activist Legal Centre or Activist Legal Service straight after this. So I won't steal their thunder, but there's also been responses from Amnesty International and Liberty Victoria, essentially saying that the police actions were way out of step with what was necessary. It was an exercise in violence, in making capsicum spray normal and flashbangs and rubber bullets, and the right to protest in Melbourne is coming under attack. Individuals came under attack, but the right to protest was coming under attack. And I think the very simple response is we come back, and we come back in larger numbers at each and every protest to assert the fact that Melbourne is a protest city. Melbourne is a city where you don't have to ask for permission to go onto the street, and that the police need to step back and let us go about the business of calling out things that are wrong with our society.
But it really, in some ways, goes a lot deeper than that, because it appears to me that there's something very, very sinister going on, David, because if taking us back 24 years ago to S11, you know, with the World Economic Forum, there were so many more numbers marshalled on those protests. I was actually present at that protest and also involved in some of the organisation, as you were yourself. And in fact, around that time, I don't know if you remember, but there was actually an event that the military organised about possibly getting a shoot to kill law coming through. Back then, it didn't come through, but...
Yes, I don't remember that specific instance, but my understanding is it's in current law that the government can call the military out in extreme circumstances. I believe that's already a legal right.
Right.
But it's never been used.
Not yet.
For younger listeners, S11 was a protest around Crown Casino and the Crown Hotel Towers against the World Economic Forum having its regional conference in Melbourne. I think and there was police violence on the second day when the numbers were small and the media wasn't present. But on the first day, it was an absolute triumph for protesters. We had 10,000 people surround Crown Casino, and essentially the place was shut down. The Crown Casino stopped taking bets. On the second day, somewhere between maybe 8,000, maybe 10,000 striking workers led by Trades Hall marched down and joined the protest outside Crown Casino. So the big difference was on September the 11th, 2000, we had 10,000 people when we started our protest. Unfortunately, on September the 11th, 2024, I'd estimate the numbers at around 1,500. Other people have different figures, but that would be my estimate. And I think, looking back, we had a very clear emphasis, all of us grouped together under the umbrella of the S11 Alliance in 2000, that our main aim was a mass blockade. And so everybody, regardless of whether they were into street theatre or independent media or whatever, and regardless of their politics, everybody wanted to come together to shut down the event. I'm not sure if that message was so clear in 2024. I think people were encouraged to do a lot of different actions, and the trouble is, when our numbers are lower, the police response can be much more violent.
Absolutely. And in fact, just to set the legal context for listeners, and we'll speak more in detail with Anthony Kelly later on, but there are special powers granted, as I said at the beginning of the show. So police were granted under the Terrorism Community Protection Act 2003, and the powers can apply in the area designated under the Control of Weapons Act 1990. So special powers are in addition to powers under the Control of Weapons Act 1990, and they are to prevent and respond to terrorist acts, not to repress or control protests, so they say, but I don't think that's true.
And let's be absolutely clear, on Wednesday there was nothing remotely close to terrorism. Even the most fevered Sky After Dark commentator could not have possibly called it terrorism. A few people threw empty plastic bottles at the police. That's not terrorism. That's frustration when you see your friend being beaten by police with batons and capsicum spray. And those legal restrictions are nothing to do with terrorism. They're to do with intimidating protesters and trying to frighten people off so that the number of people protesting is fewer, and to give the police more rights over the people who do protest. Again, I think the best response is the largest possible mobilisation. That's always the way in which our side can assert our rights. I don't think we go up to the police and argue the toss over what constitutes terrorism. We just have a lot of people there. We can make our point safely and effectively.
So 1,800 Victoria police officers, 1/10 of all cops in the state, were deployed to protect the conference. I mean, that's such ridiculous.
Oh, it's utterly ridiculous. And that's why I think at some level the police consciously treated this as a training exercise for the kind of repression they may be called upon to implement further down the track. But I think it also tells you something, that what was going on inside the expo was absolutely indefensible. It was people selling tanks and guns and missiles, and weapons developed to kill human beings more effectively and on a larger scale. It included companies from Israel like Elbit, and it included companies that supply Israel in its current genocide, like Lockheed Martin. But it included a whole range of companies whose job is basically to kill people. And so the media, the police, Jacinta Allen, the Premier, threw their hands up in horror at a bit of a kerfuffle on the Clarendon Street Bridge. What is truly horrific is that there are people inside the exhibition centre who make their money, their profits, their salaries and all the rest of it out of being able to kill people more effectively. And you have to ask, who are the real criminals here? Is it the people selling the missiles inside, or the people standing there and copping capsicum spray and rubber bullets outside? For me, there's absolutely no question. I was very proud to stand with other people on the Clarendon Street Bridge on Wednesday.
And what drew you to the protest? What were your concerns that drew you there, David?
Well, I think these arms companies are part of a system and part of an arms industry that is supporting the Israeli genocide in Gaza and increasingly on the West Bank. But they're also part and parcel of a huge military build-up in the West, which ultimately is about preparing for war with China. I think for instance, on the next day, quite a number of us protested outside the offices of the Hanwha Corporation at 550 Burke Street. And that's a South Korean company that's has built a factory at Avalon, southwest of Melbourne, between here and Geelong. And in this factory, they're going to build infantry fighting vehicles for the Australian military, equipped with weapon systems from the Israeli company Elbit. Now, those fighting vehicles will not be used in Gaza, although the profits that go back to Elbit may well go as taxes to the Israeli military for their actions. But those fighting vehicles are being prepared, are being built in anticipation of a war with China, a war that no one will win, and a war in which ordinary Australian people and ordinary Chinese people will be the out-and-out losers. So it was standing against genocide today and war tomorrow that made me attend the protest.
Absolutely. David, we're going to have to wrap up because I've got Anthony Kelly coming up next. Do you have any final comments before we finish?
One very last thing. Refugee Action Collective, we're supporting the refugees who are continuing to protest at 808 Burke Street in the Docklands. They've been there now for, I think, 64 days, continuously around the clock, protesting for permanent visas. They welcome supporters any time, but in particular on Friday at 5:30 for a rally. So head on down to 808 Burke Street, Docklands, and show the refugees there your support.
Thank you so much, David. It's lovely to have you, and keep up the good work. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Thank you, Marisa.
Thanks a lot. Bye. And that was David Glanz from the Refugee Action Collective, and we're going to be now speaking shortly with Anthony Kelly from Melbourne Activist Legal Support. I'm just going to go into a quick announcement.
Has Centrelink made a decision you disagree with? Most Centrelink decisions can be appealed up to 3 times. Examples of decisions you can appeal include whether you're eligible for a payment, cancellation or suspension of your payment, how much you get paid, and Centrelink debts. One of the most common Centrelink decisions appealed are Centrelink debts. Centrelink will say you owe a debt if the staff determine you've been paid more than you should have. Debts can occur for a variety of reasons. In some instances, if there's been an administrative error or if you have special circumstances, you may not have to repay that debt. The appeal process is free, but time limits can apply and will affect your entitlement to back payment. Social Security Rights Victoria is a specialist community legal centre providing Victorians free advice to help you understand your Centrelink issues and the appeal processes. You can contact Social Security Rights Victoria on 9481 0355 or online at ssrv.org.au. The Federation of Community Legal Centres is a 3CR supporter.
And in case you've just tuned in, this is a Doin Time show, and we're going to be crossing over now to Anthony Kelly from Melbourne Activist Legal Support. Without any further ado, hello Anthony, welcome.
Hi Marisa, thanks heaps for having me.
It's so lovely to have you indeed. Now Anthony, I know you've got quite limited time, but I'm wondering if you could just talk about land disruption and just discuss a little bit about some of the police powers that have come through, and I don't know if you were an eyewitness at the protests or not, but if you could just talk a little bit about about the face coverings and just about what's what some of the laws are, and in conjunction with the IBAC review earlier on, and tie that up.
Sure. Okay, yeah, so I was one of the legal observers down there. We had about 19 on the Wednesday, and we had teams down there for most of the days on the Tuesday, the Wednesday, the Thursday and the Friday. So Mel's got a very good overview of the entire policing operation. And for those who don't know, Melbourne Activist Legal Support's in a bit of a unique position. We have a particular role and mandate where we stay out of the movement tactics and organising. We stay out of the issues about weapons and manufacturing and war and so forth. We focus almost purely on the policing of these sort of things. And we document, we monitor, we record all the actions of Victoria Police, and for anything that we assess that's outside the law or outside their mandate or that infringes upon human rights, we report on it. We create as much issue and advocacy as we can. So, legal observers were focusing on the actions of the police. We started, of course, monitoring the policing long before the events, when police announced that they were going to declare a designated area around the Melbourne Exhibition and Convention Centre. They announced it about a week out or so in stages, and that's something that the police minister can do, or a delegate of the police minister can do on their own volition under the Control of Weapons Act in Victoria. And again, that's a bit of legislation that came in a crime panic in Victoria back in the 2000s around youth crime on trains, use of weapons. It was all very much blown up in the conservative media, of course, but it's provided a whole raft of powers for police to stop and search people without any sort of suspicion, so they can do random stops and searches of people. And of course, the bulk of these designated areas are in suburban railway stations and shopping centres around Melbourne and Victoria. But police also more commonly use them for protest events, and it allows police to stop and search people, presumably for weapons, without any sort of suspicion. They can do it randomly, they can do it wholesale. And the designated area powers under the Control of Weapons Act also allow police to come up to anybody wearing a face covering or mask, and if the police officer believes that they're wearing that face covering for the purpose of protecting themselves for OC spray or to avoid identification, then they can ask that person, well, it demands basically direct that person to take off the face covering, and if that person refuses, then they can direct that person outside the designated area, wherever the boundary happens to be, and they can direct them to leave for a certain period of time, although that's not entirely clear how long. It's usually about 12 hours these designated areas are in place for. And so that was one set of powers that the police announced, and they used prolifically, of course, throughout the 4-day event. People were stopped and searched, and by the Thursday and Friday, police were using the searches prolifically, basically, against people who were, doing nothing but protesting or outside the front around the cordons of the exhibition centre the police had set up. But of course, the other legislation the police used during the convention was more concerning, and it was even more concerning, really, and that was the Terrorism Community Protection Act 2013. That's another bit of Victorian legislation that provides a lot of powers, including really problematic detention powers under suspicion of being involved in a terrorist activity. And this was something that the police had to go to the Victorian Supreme Court to apply for, and then the Supreme Court granted these particular powers. Now, this was provided police with a whole raft of resources and powers if they needed them, but we didn't see these terror powers being used specifically. They didn't need to because they already had the Control of Weapons Act powers. And so that's something that we're going to be examining more on, about whether and if and how police use these particular powers. It did allow them, of course, to set up really severe cordons. So people who were there at the Melbourne Exhibition and Convention Centre would have seen these really high, 10-foot high barriers and cordons. That essentially, the Terrorism Community Protection Act basically gave them powers to do that willy-nilly, and then also to stop and direct cars away from that and to search vehicles. It gave quite extensive powers if they needed them. And over the 4 days, police were patrolling the area incredibly intensely and stopping vehicles around and near the area quite routinely. And as I said, they were using the designated area powers quite extensively as well.
And so is this something that will continue?
So those designated areas and the Terrorism Community Protection Act powers, the special powers, they've all ceased now as of Sunday evening. So they're all short-term, which is good. They're not ongoing. But the designated area powers, they can declare again with minimal notice. So it's something that we're going to see again and again. And interestingly, a lot of people are probably interested to know that it looks like the police minister and the police will be seeking the ways they can strengthen these powers in terms of their anti-protest provisions. And we suspect that reasonably soon the government is likely to introduce some form of anti-masking, additional anti-masking powers or legislation.
How so, if there's COVID?
Oh, well, yeah, so that's one of the arguments against anti-masking, of course, that people wear masks for public health purposes. They're really critical and important for that. There's still... COVID is still a significant public health issue in Victoria, and people wear masks appropriately for that. So that's one of the arguments. The other argument, of course, there's multiple, but the right to political expression, masks are often a core part of that. We saw Benny Zabel in his classic gas mask attire down there at the Disrupt Land Forces again. And the other thing is religious purposes. People wear face coverings, and also people very justifiably wear masks at protests in order to avoid both state surveillance and the scrutiny of, antagonistic parties, hostile actors such as far-right and neo-Nazi groups. So there's a lot of very logical, coherent rationales to wear masks and face coverings at protests, but states around the world are increasingly moving to find ways of banning them and
banning masks.
And criminalising the wearing of them.
That really makes my blood boil, Anthony. Like, it's just, it beggars belief, actually, what has happened. I mean, I have listened to a lot of audio on 3CR in particular about the way that the police, not only the way the police have handled protesters, but also the way that protests have been demonised. And it just beggars belief, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that Mel's was monitoring, and of course I'm sure most of the listeners would have noticed and heard, was the strategic demonisation and disinformation leading up to Disrupt Land Forces event, where police, strategically released a whole range of information, and also government ministers who should know better were very early on in stigmatising and highlighting the potential for violence, etc. And this both provides a rationale for an extraordinarily, overkill of police resources being used for these sort of events. It provides the rationale for them. It allows police to get more money and resources. But also it sets the scene, the public narrative for protesters equal bad and violent, and police equal good and rational, and so forth. And so before and after the event, we saw this playing out, particularly, and after Wednesday, of course, we saw the combined forces of conservative media and members of parliament and commentators and the police union all working overtime to ensure that the public narrative was that the protesters were universally violent and the police were restrained and appropriate in their response.
And just finally, as a legal observer, what were your eyewitness accounts? Are there any eyewitness accounts that you can describe in terms of anything that you saw?
Yeah,
about protests being injured?
Yeah, for sure. So Mel's is still collating evidence and pulling together its report. We're aiming for a really detailed, comprehensive report as soon as possible, of course, and partly because we recognise how important that is as an independent advocacy body that can provide that sort of level of scrutiny and evidence, and make sure that key stakeholders have got access to that. So on a personal level, I saw some really horrific levels of police violence. We saw the public order response team in level 4 riot response gear, so the shields and batons and helmets. And also New South Wales public order, riot unit, also down there as well. And we saw a lot of incredibly brutal arrests where people were slammed to the ground, punched, kicked, had faces held into concrete, and or knocked against walls when they were arrested, and those really brutal sort of leg sweep takedown techniques that when people are already handcuffed. So we saw quite a few of those arrests, and a lot of people with reasonably severely injured in those. We managed to be with a few people who were, whilst under arrest, had severe head injuries, and one was going in and out of consciousness, and we had to, and the ambulance basically took an hour and a half or so to get to these people. And then, of course, we also saw the deployment of these really horrific crowd control weapons. So we saw the VKS pepper ball gun being deployed. It's been used a few times now against protests, and that fires tiny paintball-style pepper balls, which are filled with the CS gas, like an OC gas. And we also saw the 40mm baton round launchers. So these fire quite hard, large rubber batons. The police minister was calling, the chief commissioner was calling them foam bullets, but that's a misnomer. They're not soft at all.
No.
It's a hard rubber, and they cause quite severe bruising and potential and really severe head injuries. And one person we spoke to was a photographer, a protest photographer who was hit in the ear, had to go to hospital when they eventually got out of the police zone, and had stitches on their ear, perforated eardrum, lost a part of their ear apparently, and won't know if they got permanent hearing loss until the stitches come out next week.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Anthony, for coming onto the program. And just, are you able to point listeners to the website if they want to have a look at the IBAC review into police deployment of OC or capsicum spray earlier this year?
People could probably go to the MELS website, and we've got a statement on that, or a response to it. So if they go to mels.au, it's the simplest URL, and up the top they'll find legal resources if they want to find out about what to do if people were affected by OC spray or assaulted by police on the Wednesday or the days afterwards. So there's a range of legal options and suggestions that we make for people about civil actions they can possibly take or and getting legal support. And there's also, in our news and events, there's also initial statements about Wednesday's policing and older statements about the IBAC review of OC spray use by Victoria Police.
Thank you so much for coming onto the program, Anthony. There's an enormous amount of work to be done in the aftermath and a lot of lessons, and I'm hoping that we can have a lot more workshops and even some defence stuff happening. Thanks a lot.
Thanks heaps, Marisa.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye. And that was Anthony Kelly from Melbourne Activist Legal Support, who gave some harrowing eyewitness accounts, demonisation of protesters, and had a snap look at some of the incredible police powers that came through. And it's not going to go away because these police powers will be coming in long term, I surmise.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
Hi, it's Nasser Mashni from Palestine Remembered, Australia's only dedicated show on Palestine. Join me every Saturday morning at 9:30 and very importantly, get along to our rallies. Sunday, 12 o'clock, State Library. Join us.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
We know you love listening to 3CR, but we also know that many of you haven't downloaded the Community Radio Plus app yet.
The app lets you tune in anywhere and share the station with your friends.
So, show the love and share the love and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
Woman business in the home. Woman business, live alone. On the streets or in a home. She's a woman, not alone. With the children or a man. She's a woman, she understands. Woman business in the home. With my fingers to the bone. Woman business in the home. Woman business, live alone. No, 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 no. No, no, no. No, 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 no. No, no, no. No, 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 no. No, no, no. Woman business, live alone. In an office or in a car. The problems they are very far. Do it elsewhere, fashionable things. She's a woman, she knows her thing. Woman business in the home. Work my fingers to the bone. Woman business in the home. Woman business, live alone. Woman business, live alone. Woman business, live alone.
And in case people have just tuned in, this is the Doin Time show, 8:55 a.m. on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. It's approximately 3:42 and we're going to be nearing the end of our show very soon. I just wanted to make some concluding comments in regards to the show today. I wanted to thank David Glanz and Anthony Kelly for joining us on the show today. And I also wanted to give a shout out to everybody that was at the protests, everybody that recorded and worked behind the scenes. And I think there's really a lot of work to be done and a lot of reporting to do still, and a lot of workshopping to look at what we can do to bring larger numbers onto protests next time this happens, because there will be more powers, there will be more weapons conference in Victoria and indeed in the whole of Australia. And there'll be more opportunities for police to play with their toys as well. Just wanted to also encourage any protests that were injured or that were arrested or who just wanted to talk about eyewitness accounts that happened at the protests, or whether they're working behind the scenes or if they've been affected in any way, to actually come into the studio and talk to me, and on air, and I'd love to hear from you. It'll be great to actually have a series on this show in regards to looking at police powers and looking at how people have been demonised. And in fact, one of the things that I've been doing is I've been listening deliberately to a lot of mainstream media, and it's really become very clear, hasn't it, that 3CR is one of the few radio stations that reports things accurately and is transparent and looks at the truth. Whereas, you've got some radio stations and also other media outlets, television, that all they can talk about is how police threw manure at the horses and the horses were harmed. It's quite a disgusting, and it just proves that there have been gross violations of human rights. So just to give a little bit of background also about the land disruption, the conference. So I'm just going to read out some information here. Now, I'm not sure how it's spelled NIOA. It's actually NOIA, which is the majority supplier of guns and bullets to Australian police. Since 2012, NIOA has supplied Australian and New Zealand police with 70,000 Glock pistols. NIOA also supplies 70% of ammunition to Australian police, and according to their website, by 2022, the company had supplied over 1 billion rounds have been supplied by NIOA to the Australian law enforcement, military and sporting markets. This Queensland company has evolved from a small regional ammunition retailer to Australia's largest privately owned firearms and munitions supplied. It is still the major supplier of guns and bullets to Australian and New Zealand police. And now it is starting to play a bigger role in the global supply chain thanks to support from defence export strategy and partnerships with big players like Remetal, Winchester and others. And NIOA recently took over US company Barrett Firearms, making them a direct exporter of sniper rifles to both Israel and Indonesia. NIOA continues to exercise political influence through the board of SIFA, Shooting Industry Foundation of Australia, and through familial ties. NIOA CEO Robert NIOA is also the son-in-law of federal member of Kennedy Bob Cater. NIOA has donated at least $160,000 to Cater's Australian Party, KAP, and $29,000 to the Liberal Democrats. Its political influence is evident in its board of directors and formation of new global partnerships. CEO Robert NIOA is ramping up his active political role, spurring the need for his product. For example, in a keynote address to the American Chamber of Commerce, State of National Security evident in Magdalen, Brisbane in February. And the AUKUS arrangements have been a perfect opportunity for NIOA to expand in the UK and US. And it goes on. And I just wanted to really talk about that because it's all about bolstering Australia's defence industry to support an allied military force capable of fortifying the Indo-Pacific region. And America remains the world's arsenal of democracy. And America is stirring. So it's approximately 4:48, and I just wanted to give a little bit of background. I know it sounds a little bit scientific, but I wanted to go into a little bit of depth because what is really interesting and what has been broadcasted on 3CR all week is that it's all one issue. Everything is interconnected. We had the Camp Sovereignty opening up, the land disruption protests last Sunday, and the Doin Time show actually aired audio about that. And then we had all the protests happening this week. Lots of coverage. Wanted to, as I said, give a second shout out to everybody, whether they were there or not, who assisted with the protests.
Want to know what happened at the People's Blockade of the world's largest coal port? Come along to a special 3CR screening of The First Wave, the short film that explains all, and be inspired to join the blockade this year. Revisit the epic event and hear how this incredible people-powered protestival came together. Join us on Wednesday, 18th September at 7 p.m. at Ceres. Head to Rising Tide Victoria Facebook page to RSVP and to get all the details. Rising Tide Victoria is a 3CR supporter.
Yeah, even Arnie in the 90s had a car that ran electric, they held back the tech. Now it's this country's black future is a fire. It's the right season.
Listen back to Beyond the Bars 2024 prison broadcasts on the 3CR website, 3cr.org.au/Beyond the Bars 2024. Our all-black presenter team take you inside 6 Victorian prisons: Dame Phyllis Frost, Barwon, Fulham, Loddon, Margate and Port Phillip, to hear stories, songs, opinions and poems from Aboriginal inmates on NAIDOC Week 2024. Connecting the participants with culture and community, and to keep the fire burning, black, loud and proud. Go to 3cr.org.au/Beyond the Bars for all the details.
If you're a friend of me, I'll call you my brother. This country's black future is a fire.
Most of us agree that we deserve to be paid for the work we do, not the number of candles on our birthday cake.
But Australia's current workplace laws allow employers to pay a lower minimum wage to someone just because they're younger.
It's an unfair and confusing system that costs young workers in Australia around $3 billion a year, and it's mostly pocketed by big multinational companies.
These junior rates are based on the unfair and outdated assumptions about people's living costs. But times have changed, and it's time the rules change too.
Boomers, millennials, Gen Z or alphas.
We may describe it differently, but we all know what fairness is.
It's time for fair wages for all ages.
For more information, go to fairwages.org.au.
Victorian Trades Hall Council is a 3CR supporter.
Now I'm harder, I'm outrun. Everything I got, it's hard one. Yes, bad luck, I'm not done. I won't stop. This country's black future is a fire with the right season. That burning school fire, black history shed not ignored. Need it, acknowledge, bring it to the front line as a nation. Bringing my head against the wall. When you don't wanna listen at all. You already made your choice. Nothing in here will make you see my point. Black history shed not ignored. Need it, acknowledge, bring it to the front line as a nation. Here for the many who walk with me. If you're on board and agree, then we can dance in this air, swim in the waters of this great land. You and me, we already pay. Most of the time I don't think about race. Why is it all about color? If you're a friend to me, I'll call you my brother. This country's black future is a fire.
It's approximately 4:55, and I'm going to be going out now with the theme song Black Fella, White Fella by the Rumpy Band. Last thing, just try to rock up to the refugee encampment at Docklands. And we are going now. It's goodbye from Marisa. Stay tuned every Monday, 4 to 5 for the Doin Time show. Bye.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.